Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm going to be feeding a bin today that's not been fed in 9 days. It's the bin that you see right here in the middle. It's labeled as RWENC Blue, and that's kind of just a mixed variety of worms living in that bin. It's red wigglers, European night crawlers, African blue worms. This bin is 118 days of age, and something I've been doing lately on my tracking system is keeping track of how long I run a bin in composting mode, and then later on I kind of stop feeding, calling that period sort of a phase of foraging where the worms are really just not getting fed any fresh food, but they're expected to just feed on the stuff that's already scattered within the material. And then at the end, a lot of times I'll just have sort of a migration phase, or maybe I'll just abruptly end it and harvest the castings in a way different than migration. But it's 118 days at this point that it's been composting a dozen or more feedings, and in my tracking system 119 days, so the bin will be 119 days tomorrow. That's my average time for composting a bin, and then at that point after 119 days switching over to foraging. So, since this bin is kind of at that average age now, this might be its last feeding before we decide to switch it to foraging. Kind of like what this bin over here is doing. It's been doing that since past 10 days now, foraging. So let's get this bin up on the bench, see how things are coming along, and maybe then we'll decide on what to do with it next. So this block of frozen veggies and fruits is what the worms are getting today. As you can tell from its size, it's a good couple handfuls of grapes, carrots, some sort of peels of different things. I don't know, maybe bits of onion or who knows what in here. It's a pretty good size feeding, and I believe that these worms can probably handle it. It's a pretty good sized population in here from what I remember, and they do pretty good on breaking down the foods that they've been given. And these grapes, I bet these grapes will take a while. They usually do in a worm bin. So let's get these little guys fed. Besides food, I'll probably add a little bit of eggshell to go with the food as their grit to help them break the stuff down. Bedding, I don't know, at a bin that's this age, a lot of times I'm reluctant to add lots of new bedding, and instead of doing so, I would want to kind of like focus the energy of the worms to focus on any residual bedding in the bin that's still in there that should probably be broken down, versus them getting some fresh new bedding. And I guess we'll probably follow suit with what I think has been done in this bin for the past few check-ins, which is not adding new bedding. Or maybe there was paper added. Definitely not new leaves, because new leaves I treat as a bedding that brings with it a little bit of pain in the neck, which is all these stems of each leaf, which takes so much longer to break down than just the leafy material. So in older bins like this one, I definitely hold off on adding fresh leaves. But I kind of like having them around and having them to spread across the top surface of the bin. So maybe we'll try to avoid blending too much of them in with the feeding today and save some of them to try to cover the top surface with at the end when we're finished feeding. So I think for that reason, we're just going to stick to pretty much the feeding. A little bit of grit to go along with it. And even what I'm doing here, like these little chunks of corn cob bits, maybe there's no purpose to breaking these up the way I just broke that first one up. Sometimes it's just more interesting to see how the worms break it down over time. It's got to be going on 2 months or so, but they're doing a great job. You saw how brittle the other one was that I had in my hand that I broke into little bits. So it's just interesting to watch how certain types of things break down. I mean, if those were whole corn cobs, an entire cob of corn, after a couple months I would hardly expect to see any evidence of decomposition. Perhaps if you snapped it in half, you would see that the worms had started eating the inside of it, that inner core part of it. So I think it helps a lot to be able to break up the corn cobs the way I do to, speed along the breakdown process. This is an older piece of food. Wouldn't have been part of the last feeding. It would have gone back, again, probably months. A mango seed. I would think that the seed portion of what's inside is probably mostly, if not all, gone by now. But they're still enjoying that outer husk too. Here I saw some stuff that appeared to be some of the leftover bedding from the last feeding, or maybe from a feeding not too long ago. Little chunks of paper that haven't been broken down yet. The worms always seem to like hanging out in that stuff. I would think that that kind of counts as sort of an easy food for them to eat once it starts to break down a little bit. I just don't like finding the stuff in big clumps like that, you know. I mean, I don't mind finding the worms in big clumps. It's always kind of fun looking through this bin because I know there is a good number of worms in here. If you just look at one handful, you can see just so many. I mean, I don't know how many are in my hand here. It seemed to me like more than 100, maybe a couple hundred even. So I keep telling myself, hey, let's see if we can get this feeding over and done with quickly and not prolong it. I just always get caught up in checking out the worms and playing around with them. So let's move on to getting this bin fed. But you know what? Let's not finish so abruptly. Here's more of that paper kind of sitting around still, but look at all these worms that are hanging out in that one piece of paper. I mean, it's truly a worm ball. There's virtually nothing else in between these worms except more worms. So there was something about that piece of paper, perhaps something that we placed on top of it in the feeding last time it was fed that soaked into it that made it into such a hot spot. But it's really driving these worms bananas. It's pretty cool. Let's watch these little guys squirm for a few minutes. Maybe we'll even sort of try to help spread them out a little bit because there is just so many of them here. It's amazing. Look at them all. Awesome. Okay, that was fun, but we don't need too much of that. A couple seconds is enough. I really like the way they're jamming around this paper. And you know what? If this is going to be one of the last feedings, I don't know if it'll be the last feeding, but who knows? Maybe the next time we check in here, we'll decide that maybe this will have been the last feeding and that we'll just withhold any future feedings to start steering the bin towards completion. I don't know. It's tempting to think about, you know, maybe getting these little guys launched off into a new environment. Maybe even a couple new environments, because there is lots of worms in here. But let's get these little guys fed. I'm thinking, you know what, I can't seem to resist. Since they seem to be having so much fun in that old paper that they had there, I figure let's mix up a little bit more of this stuff for them to be able to play around in, because they really seem to like it. And like I do a lot of times lately, I try to not allow this stuff to get clumpy and collect up together into little wads. So I'm sprinkling in some leafy material that hopefully gets caught in between the individual chunks of paper and doesn't allow the paper to sort of mat up and clump together the way it does sometimes. If the next time we check in here we're in a certain particular mood, we might actually decide to start steering this bin towards harvest. But for now I'm still keeping it categorized as being in a composting mode. So I might get fed again next time, maybe it won't, I don't know. And I know I'm placing frozen things right down into the bin here. A lot of people would probably not like to see that happen. But me personally, I think the worms can do just fine squirming away from something that they think is too cold. I don't think that this could I don't know, to me it just seems unlikely that I could just like drop something that's a little bit too cold onto a worm and cause it any harm. I mean, I think it'll sense it and maybe not like it so much and squirm away, but I don't think it's so dangerous that I've got to, like, you know, go extremely out of my way to avoid it. So hopefully I'm not mistaken in that thinking, because I hate the idea of, you know, harming my little worm friends, but I also don't think I've got to go crazy coddling them, because I think they're a little tougher than a lot of us give them credit for. I've just seen them pull off amazing things. Is this the same worm ball we played around with earlier, or another one? I think it's another one. This is an amazing. This is just such such a cool bin to play around in, you know? Is it any wonder I kill so much more time than is necessary down here when feeding my worm bins? Just can't seem to help, you know, checking all that stuff out. So, you know, there's not much left to do here. We gave them their food. We gave them their grit. Here we took a lot of this cool bedding away that they were really enjoying. I thought I had placed it all back into the feeding area. We'll just spread this stuff out across the top at this point. Keep them really interested in that middle section, I'm sure, because they really do seem very into that material once it starts breaking down. What's this? Food chunk, frozen food chunk. Let's see what we could do as far as covering up with these remaining little scraps of leaves. Oh wow, looks so natural. That's really kind of what I'm after when I cover up with leaves, because I kind of like the look, but it's totally cosmetic, so it doesn't matter. So we fed down the middle as we do usually. We're just going to indicate where we fed with that coffee filter just to show us it was right down the middle. Not that it changes much from feeding to feeding. Kind of a man of habit. All right, well, there we go. We're done with today's feeding of my mixed worm bin, European night crawlers, red wigglers, and Indian blue worms. All right, everyone, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Take care.